How's it going, guys? It's Kass. As always, if you've been enjoying my content, then hit that subscribe button. So I thought it'd be important just to go through all of the PTR changes before I started to make in-depth videos on some of them, just so you guys got my general idea of the changes overall and what Demon Hunter will be looking like going into 9.0.5. So the first thing that we want to talk about is the Unbound Chaos change. Originally, when Unbound Chaos was changed the first time and the demon slam portion was taken out and it was just turned into a direct modifier to Fell Rush, I thought specifically that the talent was just way too underpowered. The amount of damage increase didn't really make that much sense, and the talent was really going to not be used. And that's almost exactly what happened. The damage that Unbound Chaos did versus Trail of Ruin and Glaive Tempest just wasn't there. However, with this change, I think it's made it a little bit more competitive. I think it's still probably just not going to be the best option for PvE situations. However, since this is an instant ability, it's probably going to be a decent option in PvP. The main thing that you want to point out here, though, is that you're also spending a Fell Rush cooldown in order to get this damage. However, the potential burst from it is kind of interesting. And also, if you think about Mortal Rush, you're applying Mortal Rush with it as well. So it's a pretty interesting change overall. Moving on from the talent changes, we're going to talk about the Covenant changes. So we obviously had some nerfs to Vengeance, and I don't really play tanks, so that's not that big of a deal to me. But we also got a redesign to Father the Flame. So instead of being the 2-minute cooldown active ability that you would be pressing, it is now going to be a passive ability that happens randomly on damage. What it does now is about every 45-ish seconds, you have a chance to spawn a demon. Whenever you kill the demon, it drops a demon soul, which gives you increased damage for 15 seconds. And then that demon also explodes and does a decent amount of damage as well. It is an AoE ability, but after 5 targets, it gets capped, similar to how Blade Dance does, and it also heals you for 30% of your life. Just thinking about the ability, it seems very, very good. However, the main thing to point out here is that this is an ability that happens randomly, and so you're going to have situations where it happens in good portions of the fight, or you're going to have situations where it happens in very bad portions of the fight. And a main trade-off here is that since it forces you to play Throat Glaive, you can't actually use Fell Bombardment with this either if Fell Bombardment gets to a point where it becomes the best option. So that's just something to point out that I thought of initially. When thinking about this also, it doesn't really account for the current issues with Demon Hunter, which is single target. The amount of actual single target damage that you get with this ability still isn't that great. The damage increase doesn't really account for the lack of damage that the talent actually gives you. However, it definitely is a much better option than Father to the Flame was before. I think if you're one of those players that desperately wanted to play Necrolord because of the aesthetic, that this allows you to play Necrolord and not feel like you're gimping yourself. The Soulbind options too are pretty interesting. The Emily one looks okay. I'm not 100% sure on any of the other options, to be honest. There's some defensive capabilities that some of the other Soulbinds give you. However, it's probably just going to be Emily or bust. Realistically, I think this is a good change. It obviously is a positive change, especially for the people that wanted to play Necrolord. However, I don't think it's going to be a dominant option. And lastly, we're going to move into the legendary changes. Now, these are some pretty interesting changes, and the first one that we're going to talk about is the Fell Bombardment change. So the way Fell Bombardment is currently implemented is not good at all. A lot of the times it takes 2 full Immolation Auras for you to get a 5 stack, and that's single target obviously. And in even some situations in like 3 targets, you don't even get a full 5 stack in an Immolation Aura. And it feels pretty terrible to not get full 5 stacks whenever you're in AoE situations. The main thing with this change is this 5% increase doesn't really seem like that much, but it's actually massive. Whenever you're in AoE situations, it may be just the best option for an AoE based legendary. The major drawback of this legendary is the single target portion of it. I think if you're in a situation where you're not doing AoE for the majority of the time, so not in a Mythic Plus environment, this legendary is not going to be good in general. However, in Mythic Plus, we could see some playability with this legendary, just given how insane some of the situations can be with it. I think if you had a pack of like 5 or 6 monsters, you could probably get a full 5-stack and a second 5-stack in a single immolation aura. So that's something to think about. The amount of damage that this does is pretty good. The total amount of AoE that it does is also very good. And some of the bugs that this item originally had, I haven't noticed, but I also haven't really tested it too far aside from like 3 targets. Moving on from Fell Bombardment, we have the Dark Glare Medallion change, and this is a extremely interesting change. So Dark Glare Medallion used to be just a flat 20% chance to refund whenever you press I-beam, and now it's been increased to 40%, and it also refunds the fury of the I-beam. The actual refund portion of this doesn't make that much sense. It kind of makes Blinding Fury just useless in those situations because you're not really getting anything out of the refund if you're playing Blinding Fury. Also, it doesn't really make that much sense because of the Furious Gaze issues also. So if some of those get changed, this legendary could potentially just be the best option by far. 40%, well, it doesn't seem like that much. It definitely can happen a lot more, especially if Cycle of Hatred becomes the best option. I'm going to be making a much more in-depth video talking about this legendary, some of the issues with it currently, and hopefully we can get some of those issues changed to make this legendary very good. Currently, I think this is a very fun legendary to use. The randomness obviously kind of sucks with it. However, anything that comes with a legendary like this is going to have randomness to offset some of the fun factor of it. I kind of wish that the second half of this legendary didn't say refunds the fury of I-beam. I wish it said it increases the damage of I-beam by a flat percent. That way, even when it doesn't refund, you still get some utility out of the legendary. Overall, this legendary has some very interesting theory that can happen with it. It's probably going to be relatively strong, but we'll have to see if some of the current mechanics in the game get changed to make this legendary very, very good. Next, we're going to talk about the Burning Wound change. This is one that I haven't had too much time to test. However, just the general changes are very positive with this legendary. The main thing is that the immolation aura damage from the buff that you get is actually pretty insane in AoE. The amount of damage it's doing is crazy and probably going to get nerfed. But if it doesn't get nerfed, this will probably become the best legendary for AoE situations. The actual dot portion of it doesn't really mean anything in this legendary. The majority of what this legendary is giving you is going to be from the immolation aura increase. I wish that the dot damage was a little bit higher, but it was applied by something like Throw Glaive instead. That way the actual amount of flat immolation aura damage potential you can get is lower, but the amount of dot damage that you get is increased. So that way in single target situations, this legendary feels better. So if you think about it from that perspective, if this was tied to Throw Glaive instead of Demon's Bite, you would have it up constantly still. It'd be pretty similar to Bloodlet, but you would also still have the positive of immolation, the immolation or damage increase, while making it so in AoE situations, you're not just Demon's Biting every monster possible, pressing immolation aura to do as much damage as you can with your immolation auras. In those situations, the application feels a little bit better for the overall situation. And that is pretty much it when it comes to the rest of the Demon Hunter changes. Overall, I think these changes are extremely positive. They're going in a direction that's not necessarily the right direction. However, this does make a little bit more options for legendaries for Demon Hunter as well. Overall, these are very positive changes, and hopefully when they come to live, they feel as good as they do on PTR. As always, if you like the video, leave a like. If you didn't like the video, F5, refresh, try it again, maybe like the second time. Have a good one.